the rationale and rationalizing of what they're doing and of what they support and how it's necessary and how you have to fight for your people, for your land, is so deeply set. I mean, to be fair, on all sides, but the way that the Palestinians go about it is kind of relentless over generations. And it just seems when you talk to people like the Barghoutis, who have no regrets about what they and their families did, perhaps maybe they have private regrets, but they're certainly not going to admit it to a journalist. How impossible it seems to see any sort of solution to this.
Joe Biden's national security advisor is meeting with Israeli officials over the next 2 days. The US president says he wants the Israeli military to focus on saving civilian lives as they continue the campaign to eliminate Hamas. Richard Spencer is the Times special correspondent in Israel. Richard, good morning.
Hi, good morning.
When we have these meetings, we hear about them. The national security advisor meeting with Israeli officials. To what extent does the pressure that the US apply actually have a material impact on Israel's strategy?
At the moment, not. I think it's going to be something that really comes to a head in the beginning of January or later anyway. America is very keen to see this war over. The images from Gaza are pretty terrible. I mean, well, they're obviously terrible anyway, but terrible for the Biden administration in election year because so much of his own Democratic base is opposed to what's going on and blames Biden for supporting Israel. So he wants that all to be over and civilian casualties minimized in this war. Israel has a very clear plan, which does not involve finishing this war quickly. So that is a clash. At the moment, Israel is saying we're going to carry on anyway. Now, Israel does depend on America for support, both political support and moral support and weapons supplies. So it can't really ignore America. But on the other hand, America has never made good a threat before to cut Israel off. So I think the calculation in Israel is to basically push America as far as it can go without actually severing that relationship.
Yeah, I mean, how much further do you think? How much room is there for them to do that?
Well, I think there's two things. There's this deadline that apparently, though they deny it publicly, we're told by lots of people that America have basically given Israel a deadline of the end of the first week in Israel to stop this ground offensive. Israel says it's going to go on for longer than that, the war. So the second thing is do they change the nature of the war? So they're not going to stop fighting and pull the troops out at the end of the first week of January. That's clear. They are going to stay in Gaza so long as they need to fight Hamas, in their view. But what they might do is stop the very big offensive operations as soon as they think they have some sort of ground control in Gaza, across Gaza, which probably won't be by the end of the first week in January, but it might be by the end of January. And then just stay there and do sort of targeted raids on tunnels when it's attacked while it tries to secure Gaza. We don't know if that's good enough for America. I think no one really knows what that looks like at the moment. It's a very complex war in that sense. I don't think any of us know quite what the next stage of the war looks like.
Talking about the complexity of the war, looking at the piece you've written inside the Times this morning. The Barghoutis in the West Bank, can you remind us sort of who they are and how their experiences, their deeply held views just show how complex, how emotionally wrought this conflict is?
Yeah, so they're quite a well-known family, but they're not the only family like this. This is a family called the Barghoutis. The woman I interviewed was the oldest of the women prisoners who was released in that hostage prisoner exchange during the ceasefire. And it's just an extraordinary family in terms of their history of radical, violent attacks on Israelis over the last more than 50 years. the two people I interviewed this woman, Suhair Barghouti, and her uncle, who's called Fakhri al-Barghouti. He killed a bus driver in 1978, served 34 years of a life term. His brother is still in prison. His older brother joined the PLO in the 60s and was killed in 1970. And their sons have all served terms in prisons. Suhair Barghouti, one of her sons, was killed. He attacked a group of Israeli settlers, and then he was shot by the IDF. His brother carried out a revenge attack the next day. He killed a couple of soldiers. He is serving life terms, and so on. And and I wanted to sort of show how deeply set this conflict is in terms of people's attitudes, the habits, and I know it might sound trivial to call it a habit, but all behavior is habitual, and the rationale and rationalizing of what they're doing and of what they support and how it's necessary and how you have to fight for your people, for your land, is so deeply set. I mean, to be fair, on all sides, but the way that the Palestinians go about it is kind of relentless over generations. And it just seems when you talk to people like the Barghoutis, who have no regrets about what they and their families did, perhaps maybe they have private regrets, but they're certainly not going to admit it to a journalist. How impossible it seems to see any sort of solution to this.
Because what you've sort of detailed is that sort of deeply entrenched view is then passed down to the next generation without regret, as you say.
Yeah, and they made the point that they see when the IDF comes and raids their house to arrest people. I mean, they themselves are admitting they've killed Israeli soldiers. The Suhair Barghouti's husband was a founder of Hamas, so he was arrested for political reasons as well, repeatedly, spent years in prison. But the sons and the grandsons see their fathers and grandfathers, and indeed grandmother, in Suhair Barghouti's case, being dragged off to prison by the Israelis, and that's what they see, and that's the environment that they grow up in. They're not intimidated by that. They see it as something to follow.
Richard, thank you so much for just providing a bit more context. Richard Spencer, the Times special correspondent in Israel, writing today in the paper about specifically that family, the Barghoutis in the West Bank, defiant about their part in the bloodshed despite relatives' deaths. It's a really insightful read I recommend.